memory? We talked about that last year. Want to talk about it again?
Oh,
Let's see
okay.
where this goes. Or we can talk about Pinchas catalogs all the demographics of the Jewish people.
No, that's not as much fun. I think
And all the sacrifices for all the holidays.
oh no. The whole concept of the deity gets called into question with the end of with that Pinchas.
Yeah, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. Give me one moment. I'm just getting us set up, and it's been a while since I used the thing in the show. Okay. Okay, now we're ready to roll. Let me go back to Zoom. Okay, so today is the 17th day of Tammuz. It's the beginning. It's one of the 4 formal fast days. You know, Yom Kippur is biblical. Then there is the fast of Gedalia, the 10th of Teves, the 17th of Tammuz, the 9th of Av, and there's also the fast of Esther. But there's a cycle of 4 fasts that relate to the destruction of the first and second temples. So the 10th of Tevet is the day that the king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, laid siege to Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of the first temple. The reason we start the cycle of fasts off with that is because all the trouble begins there. Because the second temple, the second Commonwealth and the second temple were not as great, and we were mostly under the people's rules, and we never really returned to our former glory. The 17th of Tammuz is the day that the Romans broke the walls of Jerusalem. It took them 3 weeks to get the approximately 800 yards from the wall to the temple, because the Jews fought valiantly but futilely. And even though the Babylonians broke into Jerusalem on the 9th day of Tammuz, we don't do, except for Tzom Gedalia and Yom Kippur, we never run 2 fasts within 8 days. So we fast for both temples today when the wall was breached. And the 9th of Av is the day when both temples were destroyed. The first temple by the Babylonians in the morning, the second temple by the Romans in the evening. But since we don't fast 2 days in a row, even though it mostly burnt on the 10th of Av, we mark it that way. Okay. So that is now what happened on the 9th of Av, on the 17th of Tammuz. So the first thing is, you know, just like there's good days, there's bad days, is that the Jewish people, Moses broke the tablets upon discovering the golden calf. And of course, that was a major, major disaster. And the second thing that happened was that at the time of the first temple, they ran out of sheep to bring as a sacrifice on the 17th of Tammuz. The third thing was that Apostomus, who was, it's a Greek name, but it may have been a Roman official, burnt the Torah. And whether it was in the Romans or it was before Hanukkah, a idol was placed in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. Some say it actually took place during the first temple period, when Manasseh, who was the baddest of the bad kings, sought to eradicate the worship of God and placed an idol in the temple. And the fifth thing that happened was that the Romans smashed the wall of Jerusalem and began the conquest of Jerusalem, which again took them 3 weeks. But it begins today. And today begins a 3-week mourning period in which we don't take haircuts, we don't buy new clothing unless absolutely necessary, we don't have weddings, we don't listen to live music at least, and so on. That's the basic history. Now, why do we fast? Why fast on these disastrous days? So reason number one is that that when we fast and afflict ourselves, it's a form of atonement. Secondly, we remind ourselves of the suffering and hunger of our fellow Jews during these times of trouble. And thirdly, we know that it's a sign of regret, which means to say that we're too upset about our spiritual failings. We're too upset about the exile to concern ourselves with our everyday concerns, with eating and drinking and so on. This is a limited fast. It begins at dawn, which is 3:19 here, and ends when the stars come out, which here in Massachusetts is about 9:05 p.m. It's not a full 24, 25-hour fast like Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. Those are the basic details of the 17th of Tammuz. And essentially, it's also time to reflect on those things that led to the destruction of the temple. And foremost among them was causeless and unnecessary hatred among the Jewish people. On the 9th of Av, I'm going to give a class in the classic piece of Talmud there, time to be announced, and we'll put it also on Zoom. Okay, so those
Rabbi,
are... Yes, Sylvia.
I was interested that you said unnecessary. Unnecessary.
One moment,
trouble.
please. One moment.
Unnecessary.
Just 1 second.
Hello?
Sylvia, the rabbi just stepped away from the camera.
Oh, okay. I thought I had lost my connection.
No, we're still here. Michal, are you teaching this summer?
Yes, I am.
Once.
Ah,
Are you?
I never taught summer school. Salem State was not, for the most part, air
One
conditioned.
moment, please. I had lost the last minute. I had a malfunction in my monitor. Let me fix it. Give me 1 second. 1 instant, please.
So the buildings weren't air conditioned, so I just never, and
Yeah.
also the salary was just so
1
much
second.
lower.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes,
Yes?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yes?
Yeah. Okay. So my monitor I just have to get a piece of tape and fix it. Give me 1 second.
Herb, did you get downtown to any of the Marblehead Festival stuff? We just passed because of the weather.
Yeah, I did not.
Okay. I heard from
Okay.
one of my colleagues
A
in
minute.
Salem State that the fog prevented people from seeing the fireworks who were down at the
I heard
harbor.
that too. I heard that too.
Yeah. Michal, did you see fireworks over DC?
Did not.
1 second, peoples. Okay.
That's okay. We're having a good time here.
I'm sure you are, but I'm not doing my duty. No, I have a cut wire on my monitor, so I'm trying to tape it up. 1 second. It'd be a good enough temporary fix. Okay, everyone. Okay. There we are. Oh, sorry about that. So what was the question? Sylvia had a question before the monitor went on the blink. Sylvia,
Has been important. I can't remember
you had a
it.
question.
It'll come back to me, Rabbi, if it's important. Right now, I lost it.
Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. So, does anyone have any other questions about the 17th of Tammuz before we go to the Parsha? I just like to make the point that that one of the that one of the aspects of a fast day is that is this concept that that nowadays we don't have the ability to bring offerings in the temple, but when you fast, you consume a certain amount of your substance, of your flesh and blood, and that's also considered an offering. And that basically the lack of concern with one's physicality is a form of self-improvement. Okay, let's go on to the Parsha. So there's something very important, by the way, that happens in this Parsha, besides the census and the Korbanot. Everyone knows about the beginning, where God rewards Pinchas for ending the plague on the Jewish people by slaying the prince of Shimon, who had blatantly challenged a fundamental pillar of Judaism by schlepping the non-Jewish princess to Moses and being intimate with her in front of everyone, and so on. And there was a great plague. So that's probably what everyone was referring to. But there's something else in this parsha that happens that is very, very important. And that is the transfer of leadership from Moses to Joshua. And I want to look at this because, first of all, it's very hard to follow Moses. I mean, Moses was Moses. So the idea that Hashem appoints a leader over the Jewish people who doesn't have to be Moses, and what those qualities of leadership are very interesting. So I'm going to bring it up on the screen in one moment.
Frankly, I found the daughters getting the land more interesting than the transfer of power to Joshua.
Well, that's also an interesting case. The daughters of Slavchad. And indeed, this is one of the 3 times, and I'm going to post it here. This is one of the 3 times that Moses didn't know what to do and had to ask God. That is also, here you are.
Isn't that sad? That's so sad. Moses couldn't see it. It was obvious.
No, not necessarily. In many cultures in the world at the time, women didn't inherit at all, no matter what.
Right, but this is the new Jewish people.
Okay, so he had to ask God. You can't just change the world without asking.
I don't know. If I were Moses at that point, I think I was pretty important.
It's not. That's not his prerogative. All the rules. Remember, the whole premise of the Torah is that even the simple things like the laws of torts and theft come from God. Everything comes from Hashem. So if God, the whole laws of inheritance had never been given to Moses until the daughters of Zelophehad showed up. In which case, Now, so the rule is that remember the inheritance we're talking about here. There's a lot to be said. So let's see what happened. Let's read the piece since you brought it up, and let's read the piece. So the daughters of Slacha, the son of Pefer, the son of Gilad, the son of Machir, the son of Menashe, of the families of Menashe, the son of Yosef, came forward. And his daughters' name were Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. And we use a different order in another place to let you know they were all equal. And they stood before Moshe, and they said, our father died in the desert. He wasn't in the people of Korach. He died of his own sin. He has no sons. So our father's name, in other words, the family will be completely eliminated. This is talking about the inheritance of the land of Israel. In other words, the land of Israel was divided up into 12 tribes, and that inheritance goes from father to son. But this was the only family in the desert that had no sons, only daughters. So they say, why should our family lose out? Because there's only daughters. Where there's sons, the assumption is that the sons inherit the portion of the land, and the daughters will marry someone who will have a portion. So everyone will have a portion. It's all fine. But here, if we don't get our father's portion, so then this particular family line comes to an end. So Moshe brings the case before Hashem. What does Hashem say? Zelophehad's daughters speak justly. You'll give them a portion of inheritance along with their father's brothers, and you shall transfer their father's inheritance to them. And then he speaks the laws of inheritance. If a man dies and has no son, his inheritance goes to his daughter. If there's no daughter, you should give his inheritance to his brothers. If there's no brother, you should give inheritance to his father's brothers, or his father's brothers' descendants, and so on. There is no one in the Jewish people who doesn't have a relative up the father's line. Why? Why? Who knows? Because sooner or later you get back to Abraham. So sooner or later there's a relative up the father's line.
If they were willing to make an exception for the daughters, why don't they give it to the father's sisters?
That would happen if there were no sons. In other words, the way it works is as follows. First, the sons inherit the land. We'll talk about chattels and other things later. We're talking about the portion of the land of Israel. There are other issues with other types of inheritance. We're talking about the land that was divided up in the portion beforehand, where God tells Moses how to divide up the land. And next week we learn about the borders of Israel, which, as you will see, when we say occupied territories, it means all the parts of Israel that we presently do not possess. Anyways, but so if there's sons, the sons inherit. If there are no sons, the daughters inherit. If there are no children at all, we go back to the brothers. In other words, the sons of the descendants, the deceased person's father, right? If he has no brothers, it goes to his sisters, to the daughters of the father. If there's no descendants there, you go back to whoever the descendants are of the next generation up. So, for example, if you go 3 generations back, and the only one with offspring is the great-grandfather's daughter's son's daughter, then it goes to her. You get it? You keep going back a generation, first the boys, then the girls, and you keep going back till you find a descendant of one of those ancestors.
Okay.
I think I have a diagram somewhere.
No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, but I have a question.
Yes.
This has nothing to do with their association with Judaism?
Well, the only people who are called family in Judaism for inheritance are someone who's legally Jewish. If a Jewish man married a non-Jewish woman and had a child, according to Jewish law, that child is not inherited because that child is not that person's descendant. You can only have Jewish descendants. A non-Jew can be your genetic descendant, but cannot be your legal descendant.
Wow.
On the other hand, if a Jewish woman were to marry a non-Jewish man, and she passes away, and she is the only child of her father, then her father's portion of the land of Israel would go to this female offspring of a non-Jew because when it comes to Judaism, men don't count. In other words, to be a Jew, you need a Jewish mother, and men are irrelevant. Men govern what tribe you belong to, but they're otherwise irrelevant in terms of Judaism. Yes, Herb. Yes, Herb Newborn. We have two Herbs now. So
Yes, Rabbi. So unfortunately, I have to go at 12 o'clock. I have a conflict, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, you might help us out with how in the very last Parsha, Maseh, they basically undid this rule for the daughters.
no,
and you know what I'm talking about.
right. So in the last Parsha, they were told they needed to marry into their own tribe.
Right. So doesn't that mean it goes really back to the men again? If the women don't do what they're supposed to do?
It goes back to her. It goes back. If she marries into the tribe, her property is inherited by her children, who happen to be
in the tribe. Right.
Yeah, but there's an important point to know about this, and this is one of the things we celebrate on the 15th of Av. We know by the oral tradition and by the book of Judges that this only was for the first generation, only for the generation of the daughters of Tzlofka. In other words,
I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, and this is a big deal because it's one of these cases where the oral law completely modifies the written law. But it was only that first generation. And several of the commentaries explain that the logic there is, very interesting logic, that for the first generation they entered the land, they wanted the tribes to settle in their land, to acquire it, to defend it, to conquer it. Once they were settled, we don't mind if land moves from one tribe to the next.
Gotcha.
But the first generation, we wanted everyone to get their identity. That's what the commentaries say.
I have never heard that before. Thank you.
But by the way, if you look at, I believe Rashi in Maseh does discuss it. You just there's a very good translation of the Rashi on Chabad.org on the weekly Parsha. Sefaria has also, but the Chabad.org has the better translation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the inheritance of daughters. So when it comes to chattels, to movable objects, so the laws of inheritance so first of all, the Ketubah as a pretty document, as a beautiful, document that we hang on the wall. But the Ketubah is actually a document that lists the husband's obligations to the wife. Just for the record, there is not a single obligation to the wife to the husband listed in the Ketubah. It's his obligations to her. Now, there are something called Tanai Ketubah, the conditions of the Ketubah, which are already well established at the beginning of the Second Temple. They're not necessarily listed in the Ketubah. And one of the things the Ketubah does is pay a lump sum to a woman upon divorce or widowhood. But there are other conditions of the Ketubah. One is that if someone dies, as long as his wife is a widow and lives in the family house, she has to be supported until her remarriage, a form of not alimony, but of support. Secondly, there is a condition of the Ketubah that says that money must be set aside for each daughter to enable them to get married with property. When a woman gets married, unlike like British law until the late 19th century. By the way, if you read, there's a book by John Stuart Mill called On the Subjection of Women, mid 19th century. He describes the legal status of women in England in the 1830s. And I actually gave a class on this once. I demonstrated that the status of women, according to the Talmud, in the year 500 was better on every count than the status of women in Europe in the 19th century. And one of these keys is property. When a woman gets married and she brings property into the marriage, the unsfrucht, the profit of that property goes to the household. But if she gets divorced or widowed, she gets that property back. It's her property. And furthermore, a woman can make a condition that nothing of her property or her earnings goes to the household if she so desires. That normally we say that a husband supports his wife and what she earns and what her property earns goes to him. But if she says, hey, I got a better job than you, and when we get married, I don't want you to control my money, the Talmud says that's perfectly okay. And in many cases, there are many famous women in Jewish history that this was the case. But the next thing is that when someone dies, his daughters are and minor children are supported from the estate. The daughters are supported by the estate until they get married and then given a marriage portion. And the Talmud says that if there's not enough money to support the boys and the girls, we support the girls and the boys can go beg in the street. They can go cast themselves on the community because it's much more difficult for women to have to go from door to beg than it is for men. So the rule is that none of the boys get the inheritance until the girls are married off and left the household, if there's not a lot of money. If there's a lot of money, so the interest, the profit produces enough to support the girls until they're married. And these are all things that, none of your people who spend their time complaining about Judaism and women even know. It's all in the Talmud. It's all in the Code of Jewish Law. It's been the practice for over 2,500 years. And most American Jews don't even know this. Furthermore, with inheritance, take care, Herb, have a good day. With inheritance itself, there is a very fascinating discussion in the Rishonim, in the medieval authorities, who write that even though technically the inheritance goes to the sons, everyone is supposed to write a will that gives as a gift before death, because any gift you make before death isn't included in inheritance. You write a gift before death to ensure that the daughters inherit movable objects and chattels and so on and money. That it's established that there's always, besides the portion under the ksuba, that a person with ample assets should make sure that he writes a document that legally guarantees the daughters the right to some of that property. And there are two ways to do this. One is where you write a gift that is binding the moment before death. And the other is a little bit more complicated. It's what they do nowadays because it avoids the problem of someone of questionable mental status nullifying the gift. You write a will. And what you do is, and I've helped people with this, you write a will that says as follows: I, so-and-so, after 120 years of life, when I pass away, I am indebting my estate to my wife and daughters, or to my daughters. Let's say your estate's $5 million. I'm indebting my estate to $10 million, so double the value of the estate. However, if the sons, because the sons inherit, so the moment they inherit, they owe $10 million to the girls, assuming there's $5 million, right? However, if you agree to distribute to distribute the monies according to X being a will executed according to the laws of whatever state you live in, then I release the debt and my estate does not owe this money to the girls, and everyone inherits according to the will, however you wrote it out. That's because biblically you're not allowed to nullify the law of inheritance, which says this firstborn boy gets double, the boys get the rest, the girls get the conditions of the ketubah that we discussed. But one can organize that everyone gets equally, and that has been the practice for a very long time. And the rabbis warn against not including one's daughters in one's inheritance by using some such method. Furthermore,
Rabbi,
yes, Sylvia,
what
go ahead.
about the law of the land being the law?
So the law of the land is the law only applies to mandatory things. I'm allowed to dispose of my property as I see fit. Some states demand a certain amount going to the wife, but again, that is avoided by creating a document of indebtedness that enshrines the will as the wishes of the person. But there's the law of the land only says you need a will. A will is probated in a certain way. That doesn't have to contradict Jewish law. I could, in theory, make a will that leaves everything to the boys. Many good British mysteries begin with someone giving money to one person and not the other, and then getting themselves killed with a candlestick in the drawing room, right? So all the good British mysteries begin that way. But the point being, the key point being that that the law of the land is the law applies only where the law of the land does not contradict the Torah, and it's a monetary matter. Since you can do as you wish with your property, you can follow. And indeed, the same commentaries I mentioned say that you should always leave something over to be inherited according to the laws of the Torah. So you leave $100 over, and you have 5 kids, you have 4 kids, so the firstborn boy gets $40 and everyone else gets 20, and the rest you distribute according to the will that was executed by this condition of indebtedness, which is halachically valid. So you can use a secular will, but it must be included in the envelope because the Jewish laws of inheritance are not negated by the laws of the land, because they're called a chok, they're called a statute, which means they are inviolate. However, you can adjust the who gets what in accordance with the things we have discussed today.
Hold it. I'm kind of lost. I mean, I was raised in a household where the will basically, the sort of the standard kind of will that was common in my family, and as far as I know, extended family, and these people are all Jewish, was pretty much, everything I have goes to my spouse, and after the spouse dies, everything goes to our children. Very simple families, no stepkids, no previous marriages.
That's a standard will.
Yeah.
But unless you are a practicing halachic Jew who follows halach in all areas of life, you won't even be aware of the fact that there's an obligation to engage in the law of inheritance. It's like how many American Jewish families, even traditional ones, fasted on the 10th day of Tevet. That's my point. Even if you're traditional, only if you follow halakha, the laws of Judaism.
Oh, okay. Then let me get more specific. Does conservative Judaism subscribe to this particular rule? Like conservative Judaism does kashrut. Conservative Judaism does Shabbat. Does conservative Judaism do this this stuff with the wills?
In principle, it depends which conservative rabbi you speak to, but the answer is I don't know if they've changed that or if they just don't bother. Remember, there's a big difference between between what the scholars say and what most Jews do.
Okay.
I'm sure it's discussed somewhere, but the problem, the great, if you'll permit me to editorialize about a denomination that is not my own, a lot of very nice discussions of very complex halachic matters never leave the doors of JTS. And it's no secret, the conservative movement has not succeeded in getting all or even most of its adherents to follow halacha as understood by the conservative movement. You are aware of that.
That's true. Most of the people at the conservative synagogue that I belong to don't keep kosher, even though some of us do, but a lot of them didn't.
Now, to be fair, I'm the rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue, hello Israel, and not everyone in my shul keeps kosher or Shabbat according to halacha. The difference is that our shul confirms to this, and everyone knows that we hope that they'll grow into that. We never say that we don't expect it of you. And over time, people who've been involved with my shul and others, over time, we find that they really have, grown. Many people have grown. But I'm not here to talk about denominations. Obviously, I'm not a conservative rabbi, right? It's especially these 3 weeks, we don't want to say anything, that might be perceived as being deleterious about another Jew. I'll merely observe that there are many things, many halakhic concerns. Like the other day, I saw a very intricate discussion with regards to some kosher laws that probably most members in that denomination don't keep. Whatever. So it's but putting that aside, it's also many people who would call themselves Orthodox who never realize that there are Torah laws pertaining to inheritance. I know many people otherwise observant who aren't aware of this, but there is a Torah law, and one is obliged to follow the rules of inheritance. There are systems designed to make sure, basically, that women don't get left out. Some 2,500, 3,000 years old. But one of the points that many of the commentators make about this part of the Torah that we're reading is very interesting. They explain that the story of daughters of Tzlofchad is very specific. If someone dies without children, we're talking about without sons, we're talking about the inheritance of the land of Israel. But the larger moral lesson we learn from here is that one should make sure that one's daughters are not disincluded from inheritance just because they may be married to someone who has good resources and so on. That it's important that daughters be included. In the land of Israel, the premise is that each family acquires a piece of land and works it. So if there's boys, the boys have wives, they work it together. The girls have husbands, of whichever tribe, and they work it together. And obviously, since the land of Israel was very fertile and will be in the future and is now to some extent, nevertheless, in the end, as the Jewish people keep growing, not everyone is going to make a living off the land. But the idea that every Jewish family owns a piece of Israel is a very important idea. In other words, governments change, but the Torah believes that private ownership is sacred. In other words, if you own something, you own it. This is not just an economic convention, it's holy. So every Jewish family owns a part of Israel, and therefore the Jewish people collectively own all the land of Israel, and they never gave up a right to it. One of the points of this is, by the way, that when the daughters of Tzlofchad come forward, that the men were the one who pitched with the spies. The women did not. That's why only the men died in the desert, not the women. But the larger point is that you see that they stood up and said it's not possible that a Jewish family should not have a portion of the land of Israel. And the much bigger picture is that the Jewish people collectively own the land of Israel, and its ownership, it's not subject to whose government it is. Private ownership, again, in Judaism is sacred and inviolate unless you give it up. And you can't give up your portion land of Israel, because even if you sell it at the Jubilee, you get it back. And
Does
this idea
does the land ownership apply to a piece of Massachusetts?
it's not holy, no, not the same way.
I mean, when you're talking about the daughters inheriting,
No. So that would apply. If there were no sons, the daughters, if you own 100 acres of farmland near Concord or something, and after 120 years, the person dies and there were no sons, the daughters would inherit. But my point is that what you want to do is create this structure of an indebtedness that allows you to give away that land in accordance with a regular probated Massachusetts will, without breaking the laws of inheritance by assuming the indebtedness, the whole process I told you about. Because the goal is to acknowledge the Torah's laws, but to divide everything equitably among the children.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
by the way,
Rabbi,
there's another point in all this that the rabbis learned from this, is that even if you're very upset with a child, you should not ever entirely disinherit a child, even if you're very annoyed with them. Yes, Sylvia.
Yeah. What measurements, what is the outline, what is the shape of Israel that this is measured on?
So the answer is that next week's Torah portion has the borders of Israel. And there are, because we don't have any maps from back then, they didn't make maps, there is a debate for there are three debates. One is the biblical Israel promised to Moses. How big is it? Where does it go to? Secondly, how much of it was conquered and became part of the land of Israel in the first temple period? Thirdly, how much of the land of Israel was settled in the second temple period, because the laws of the holiness of the land of Israel apply only fully to the land that was conquered during or acquired during the second temple period. So there are multiple maps. We'll look at some of them next week, but roughly it includes Israel until the bottom of the Dead Sea. In other words, until the northern Negev, but then cutting across all the way to what is today the Suez Canal, so the top part of the Sinai. And going north, it includes what is today the Golan Heights, Lebanon, and a part of Syria. And because we already learned that the Jews conquered Transjordan, most of Jordan was also included in the land given to the tribes. So it's bigger than today's Israel, except that the southern Negev was never part of biblical Israel, but it was conquered by David and Solomon. And because it was conquered by David and Solomon, there is a debate as to whether one keeps one day of Yom Tov in Eilat, which is at the southern tip of the Negev, like Israel, or 2 days of Yom Tov, like outside Israel. There is an unresolved debate on this matter. But today's Israel, if we include the West, Yehuda and Shomron, what the Goyim call the West Bank, we include Judea and Samaria, is roughly the size of what Israel was for most of the first and second temple period. So it's roughly, but there are exceptions. There are parts of Lebanon that were always part of Israel, parts of Western Syria always part of Israel, and Transjordan, in other words, the area, the western half of Jordan, of what today is Jordan, the western part, not the big desert piece on the east, was historically, from the time of Moses, part of the Jewish territory. Even in the Second Temple period, it had a very heavy Jewish population. And there's a Mishnah that discusses the borders of Israel for regards to giving tithes and the like in the Second Temple, and they found a first century synagogue and the floor had a list of all those towns, and it pretty much matches the Mishnah. So we know what, even though it wasn't always under Jewish control, we know what the land of Israel was like when the Jewish people lived there before the destruction of the Second Temple and the Second Exile. And if you'll give me a moment, I will bring something up. Give me one moment, since it's a good question and it's a good preparation for next week. One moment.
Hello, Rabbi.
Yeah, hello. Hello, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm just looking for something here.
Okay. Okay. I won't bother.
No, you're not bothering me. I just. I'm going to tell you, Sylvia, I'm going to speak to you what we're going to see on the screen in one moment. Okay, here we are. So this is Israel in the second temple period. So as you'll see, some of northern Israel is not included. Okay. Some of northern Israel is not included, basically north of Haifa. But what's to the Golan Heights and eastern Lebanon are included, and about 70 kilometers, about 50 miles, a strip running from the Golan on the east of the Jordan, on the eastern bank, and then all of modern Israel until a little bit south of the Dead Sea, and then going towards Wadi El Arish, what is today in the Sinai. So bigger, except for the Negev, bigger than today's Israel, except that northern Israel was smaller, and the part of Lebanon ruled by the Jews was bigger. Okay, so so basically it's modern Israel minus the southern half of the Negev, plus the western half of the western quarter, a strip, the western 25% of Jordan, and about half of Lebanon, and a few thousand square kilometers of Syria. Okay?
Thank you.
So that's the land we're talking about. The land given to Moses is more, because according to Rashi, the land that Moses was given goes on the west all the way to the eastern branch of the Nile. In other words, again, cutting across the top of the Negev and the top of the Sinai. And in the northeast, it goes all the way to the bend of the Euphrates that is today in Syria, and goes from there out to the Mediterranean Sea in what is today the southernmost corner of Turkey. So it's all of Lebanon, a big chunk of Syria, a tiny little bit of Turkey, and because of the conquest of Sichon and Og, about half of what is today Jordan. So that is the land given to Moses and promised to the Jewish people. In addition, there are 3 more lands promised to the Jewish people at the end of days, but it's unclear what those are. There's a big debate about what those are.
Did you ever get a chance to watch that video about the Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia?
There is a video, but a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, a fine Orthodox young man who was he's married to a high school student of mine who was then a student, someone I studied with when she was in university, a very dear friend and famous artist. So her husband, who is a relatively well-known Jewish filmmaker, went to Saudi Arabia this year and is presently editing a film where he took this idea and expanded it greatly as like an hour and a half film on this whole question.
So that's not the video that I sent you.
No, I know that. I'm telling you that this idea, and it's a
Okay.
different mountain in Saudi Arabia, but this idea that the Jews sort of went right instead of left has some merit to it.
Ah, okay.
You know, the Torah doesn't tell us where Mount Sinai is. In other words, it wasn't sanctified. After the giving of the Torah, everyone could go walk on the mountain. It's not sanctified and therefore not preserved. So it may be Nebel Musa in the Sinai. It may be somewhere else entirely. In other words, there is no theological problem if Mount Sinai is in Kansas, for that matter.
Doesn't that seem strange, considering that's the center of where it all happened, so to speak?
So I don't know if you were here, but we did briefly discuss this year in one of the sessions, that the whole point of the Torah is that the Torah transcends time and place. It's true everywhere, in all places, and all times. In other words, the Torah, the land of Israel is the land of Israel, but the Torah we take with us wherever we go. The Torah is applicable everywhere, in all times, all places, all situations. And therefore, God did not want to couple the Torah to a specific place, because he knew the Jewish people would be all over the world, and he wanted them to understand that the Torah lives in our souls and in our hearts and in our communities, wherever we may be. It doesn't live in a specific place. So this is a very specific idea that the Temple Mount is holy, but the place of the giving of the Torah is not. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe once pointed out, I should say, that the Rebbe once pointed out that holiness never leaves its place, so there must be some residual holiness. But at any rate, it's not a primarily holy place, because the whole point of the Torah is that the Torah is entirely portable. Now, someone had a question.
No,
Mount Sinai,
Yeah, Israel, go ahead.
was Mount Sinai originally a holy place or not?
No, it became holy at the giving of the Torah and lost its holiness after the giving of the Torah. Sylvia, you wanted to say something?
No, I simply was responding with great interest to what you had just told us.
Well, on the other hand, the land of Israel is specifically holy, and half the mitzvot in the Torah can only be done in the land of Israel, because there is this idea that God wants to rest in a specific point in place and time. Time is Shabbat and the holidays, and place is the land of Israel, which is why many mitzvot only apply there. And God willing, next week, we'll take a deep dive into the borders of Israel and the importance of the land and so on. Okay, I hope everyone has a uplifting, inspiring, and easy fast. And we'll see you, God willing, next week on the regular day, hopefully. Sorry for the long hiatus. It's just sort of one thing after another.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you very much, Rabbi.